So I'm gonna fly the drone. In a second, I'm gonna explain what we're gonna shoot, but it's the first time I'm gonna use these new filters from Freewell. It was so kind to send them over. Link in the description. But since this drone, the Mini 4, doesn't have a changeable aperture, I'm gonna have to figure out what ND filters to use. So I've just turned everything on, and everything is very, very, very bright right now. So I'm gonna dial in the settings. This is not what I'm gonna plan on doing on the future, but we're gonna shoot 4K 60, D-Log M. Oh, and before we do anything, very, very important is to figure out how we reset the SD card. Okay, so it's still pretty bright. 2 stops. It's 2.3 stops overexposed now. Something that's around 2 stops. And we have these polarized ND filters as well. So I think we're gonna try an ND 128 with polarization on. And then we're just gonna hope that that's good enough for this shot. So I'll turn off the drone, and now we're gonna do a little operation here. So with the fingers here, we can just twist this. That was very, very easy. Put this back in here, and then we take the 128 polarization, put that on, and they've been so nice to do a horizontal and vertical filter here, so I can just put it to horizontal, and then we should have good polarization. That's to avoid some of the glare that we will have by shooting towards the sunset in a second. Let's turn the drone back on. Okay, that's way too strong. It's very, very underexposed now. By -3. So that one does not work. This is gonna be a little bit of trial and error in the beginning. Let's try the 16 instead. Set it to horizontal. Still way too. Why is it so underexposed? This is literally the least strong one.
But it is getting a bit dark.
It is getting dark. Now it's just a normal polarization filter. The sun is almost gone, even though sunset is in like 20 minutes. So hopefully this is fine now. Still the polarization, which is nice with the glare, but we're just gonna hope that, yeah, now it's perfect exposure. So that was a lot of trial and error. Now I think the light disappeared in the meantime. So let's just try and set him up. Okay, so the whole idea with this shot is I'm gonna be panned down to begin with. Now it's a little bit underexposed. I'm gonna fly forward and fly forward this stick, fly a little bit up, and then I'm gonna slowly move the gimbal up as well. So we're slowly seeing the sunset as it's flying towards it. So let's try and capture the shot. Flying forward, slowly panning up, giving it more speed. And then slowly slowing the gimbal down while still flying forward. Okay, we're gonna try that one more time. Drone coming back full speed. And we're gonna try the same one again. I set the white balance to 5600 Kelvin a second ago. And let's try it. So forward, slowly panning up. With my left finger, moving forward. Then I'm gonna look at the degrees and then slowly slow my finger down on the back. And so we hit almost 0, and I think that's pretty good. We almost lost all the light, but I think this can still work. So let's take it back into the office and see what we can do in post. All right, so we're back in the office, and before we head into the grading inside the DaVinci Resolve, I just have a few notes that I wanted to touch upon first. The first thing is that, as you maybe saw, I didn't put it in the video itself, but I changed the white balance and I changed it to 5600 Kelvin, which is normally daylight, and we shot it at sunset. So I should have changed it. I'm still not 100% familiar with changing the white balance that much, especially not for sunset, as often I've just left it on auto, but because we were panning from down to up, I didn't want it to change too much and mess up the white balance while I was flying. So setting it to 5600 Kelvin and then looking at the footage afterwards, I definitely noticed that I need to get more familiar with the sunset setting. And I know that was different, but I couldn't remember it on the spot. So I just set it to 5600 Kelvin and thought, okay, we'll just change it in post. And I'm used to working with Canon log 3 from my Canon R6. And on that, it's not really an issue that much. I can easily change the white balance even though it's not raw. But it is possible to do it here as well. But because it's D-Log M and it's the drone, smaller sensor, I will be a little bit more careful with that moving forward. So that's the first note. And the second thing, as you saw, I was struggling quite a bit to figure out what ND filter to use. And this is just gonna be practice for me because I did use ND filters on the Mavic 2 Pro I had before. But because I could change the aperture on the go in the air, it was not really that big of an issue. I was just kind of winging it in terms of how strong I thought it would be, and then I could usually just turn it down afterwards. So it'll definitely gonna take some practice for me to figure out which filters to use, but I am super happy with these filters that Freewell sent over, and overall I feel like it's really gonna give us a lot of fun different ways to capture. And because we were shooting at the water, I was super happy to have the polarized filter, and I did end up putting that on at the end as well. I don't have a before and after, or like with or without, but I've left a link to these filters down below. This is the mega pack. You can definitely get by using or getting just the polarizing pack or the normal pack as well if you're just looking for some filters and don't have the budget for the mega pack. Freewell did send them over to me, and I promised to use them in this series, but they don't have any control over what I'm saying or anything at all. I just promised I would mention them here. So there's a link down below if you want to check them out for yourself. And otherwise, let's head into the DaVinci Resolve and have a look at the grading. Now, one last note before that is that I did just try and play around with the footage just to get an idea of what we could do. So I do have a vision for it, but I'm gonna start from scratch and just show you how I grade this shot, what obstacles and issues we encounter on the way, and how I try to solve them. And I'm not going to use any LUTs this time, so we're just going to grade everything kind of from scratch. So let's head into the DaVinci Resolve and get started. All right, so we're inside the DaVinci Resolve, we're in the color page, and I've already set up the node tree that I'm going to use, turned off the conversion, so you can just see this is the raw shot. Now, the only thing I've done before this as well is that I have made it from 60 frames per second into 30 frames per second, and that is another mistake I think I made on this. I think I'm in that space where, because I have 60 frames per second now and I didn't before with my old drone, I'm shooting everything in 60 frames per second, and that's definitely a mistake. It would have looked better to just slowly fly here in 30 frames and just have it normal speed, but that's what we learn as well, and I think this shot still looks pretty good. So we're just gonna deal with it how it is. Now we're gonna balance it back and forth between here where we can see the highlights and here where we can see the shadows more in terms of grading this shot. But the first thing we wanna do, of course, is to convert it from D-Log M into Rec 709. So I've already put everything up here and cheated a little bit. So we're going to take it from DJI D-Gamut and Canon log, that gives you a softer conversion, into DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate. I also have my color management set up to DaVinci YRGB, DaVinci Wide Gamut and Intermediate, and then for the output, Rec 709 Gamut 2.4. I'm going to convert it into DaVinci Wide Gamut and Intermediate, and then I've set the custom max output of nits to 10,000 just to kind of lower those highlights a little bit. So this is what it looks like when it's just turned into DaVinci Wide Gamut and Intermediate. And then on the last one here, we're going from DaVinci Wide Gamut and Intermediate into Rec 709 and Gamut 2.4. Again, as I've said before, if you're working on a Mac and you're exporting to iPhone or something, you can try play around with Rec 709A in the output gamma instead. That gives you a good result if you are on Apple devices. I've set my MacBook display up to be on Rec 709 Gamma 2.4, so that's why I'm sticking to this, as this is the industry standard. So now I've turned both of these on, and the first thing we see if you're looking at the vector scope here and the footage itself is that it looks pretty off. And that is when we get back to the white balance. So I think I messed that up quite a bit by shooting in 5600 Kelvin. This should have been like, I still haven't checked it, but like 6500 Kelvin, I think, or something. Or maybe lower, because this is warmer colors. So we definitely have to balance this out and see where we can get with that. But because we're not using any LUTs here, LUT has changed to primaries in this one, and then we have a contrast node as well. And I'm actually going to do something a little bit different with the contrast as well in this one. So in here, if you've seen any of my other node tutorials, you'll see this is different. I'm going to add a parallel node already in the beginning here, and I'm going to call this soft contrast. Now, this is not something I'm telling you to do as your workflow. This is just something I'm playing around with at the moment. You'll see in a second why this makes sense. But in our color correction, we're going to do contrast, then exposure, then balance. This is my workflow. You can do them however you want. First up, I'm going to switch to the waveform here, and then I'm going to add some contrast. So we're just going to add quite a bit of contrast here, and by pulling up the highlights here and pulling down shadows. It's okay that it's getting a little bit dark, because that is where it comes in with this parallel node, so the soft one. Now, what I want to do is I want to balance the darkest areas here. I don't want them to go much below 10%. So I'm going to pull up the blacks just a little bit here, just to soften everything out a little bit. And then on the higher end here, I'm just going to push down the highlights as well, or the brightest parts, the white point, down a little bit as well. This gives us a softer look as well, but it still gives us contrast because of the other one, and the parallel mixer is just blending these two equally. So for me, that just gives us a little bit of a better starting point. We might go back to this in a second and adjust it further, or at the end, we'll see. But now it's time to go to the exposure, and I definitely want to lower the gain a little bit more. And then I think I'm gonna raise the shadows a little bit as well, just to get those dark areas a little bit brighter. Now, I might change up my workflow soon to actually do balance before, especially when I mess up the white balance as I did here. But let's head into the vector scope here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the offset, and right now everything is pretty much pulled down to these teal colors. So it's way too cool. So I'm going to take my offset here. And first of all, I'm going to pull it up more towards the red. And now everything becomes way too magenta. We can see that here as well. If we pull up the vector scope as larger, we can see that the colors here are now very magenta. So I am going to add a little bit of green, and then I'm going to remove some blue just to move it over a little bit. And I'm just going to play around with moving these around a little bit just to try and get into a nicer spot. And what we see now is that the footage is starting to become very green instead of blue. So now everything is very blue. Now everything became green, but the sky is looking a lot better. So this is what I'm going to balance it for, and then we're going to change the colors of the water again in a second. So now all the water is green, but I think the sky is looking pretty good. And we went from this, where everything was very, very cool, to something that's more balanced, and where the whites here are still lying a little bit to the warmer side, but I think that's okay because we are shooting at sunset here. So our color correction so far looks from this, where it was just Rec 79, to this, where everything is a little bit more balanced and looks a little bit better. And I'm still pretty happy with what we have here. We could have gone softer on the contrast, but now we have pretty strong contrast, but we still have it softer because I've added this softer node here. Now you could also just play around with lowering or increasing the blacks here and lowering the whites, but I do feel like mixing it up like this with two parallel nodes just gives me a little bit more control over this. And since they are balanced or mixed equally with the parallel mixer here, I feel like that makes sense. Again, it's something I'm playing around with at the moment. If you have any tips and tricks that you think works better, then feel free to let me know in the comments. Let's head into the color grading now. We're gonna head into the primaries here, and I want to split everything between the more teal and orange. So I want to emphasize a bit more teal and orange, orange in the sky here to really push that sunset a bit more forward. And then I'm going to add a bit more teal here. Now we do need the curves to really get into the teal colors here and not that green. So I'm going to mix between the primaries and the curves here. First up, I'm going to take the gain. I'm looking at the vector scope here, and I want it to not go straight up towards the reds. I want to go a little bit more towards the yellow. So I'm just going to take this point here. I'm just going to see where I'm moving things, where I'm moving it around here. And I'm going to look between the clip itself and down here. Just try and see where everything is moved. And I'm doing it wrong because I'm using the offset. I wanted to use the gain. So So I'm gonna redo it here. Just push a little bit more yellow into the sky up here. And then I'm gonna take the lift and I'm trying to move that more to the right and down a little bit to try and balance things out. Just try and see if we can get a bit more teal into that. And we're also getting the highlights of the gain shining through parts of the image down here as well. So already I think we've got rid of some of that green and I think it looks a little bit better. Now, this has always been an issue for me with drones, especially when I'm not using my LUTs that I built to handle some of these situations. But the colors seem to sometimes break apart a little bit or be very different from what they were in real life. For example, these greens or these blues that look green and everything a bit more magenta. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna head into the curves and into the hue versus hue to start with. What I wanna do is I wanna take everything from magenta all the way over here to green, which is same as magenta to green, so like the moving right and then all the way around here. I want to push that more center toward this line. This is actually already pretty good, so we're gonna log it off more or less. And then everything from green all the way to magenta, so green to magenta here. I want to push that more towards the teal, less green tones. So I'm gonna make a point here and here, here and here, kind of between those points. The greens or the blues here, I'm gonna push up a little bit, and then the green tealish here, I'm gonna push down a little bit. What we can see already is that we're getting a very teal blue but strong color. Then for the yellow and oranges here, I'm just gonna push that up a little bit and this down a little bit. I don't want it to be perfectly on the skin tone line here. I want it to be a little bit more yellow. I think that looks better in my eyes. This is my clip, so I can do whatever I want. And I think maybe a little bit more teal like this. I think that's pretty good. So we went from this green color and this more magenta look up here, something that's a little bit more orange, it almost doesn't change, to something that looks a bit more teal here. Now, I'm still not really satisfied with it. And I think if we go back here, we also need to check how things are looking here. Here we still have some issues that there are still some greens and we couldn't try and go stronger on the greens here by pushing them back and forth. But I think instead I'm gonna go into the hue versus saturation here. I'm gonna log off the greens in between here. I'm gonna try to just desaturate them quite hard here because we don't have any other greens and I don't really need them in this image. So before and after, now we've gotten rid of all the green colors here. And then I think if we go back here, the blues are still very strong. So I am going to move this more to the right to try and get rid of some of those blues as well. And this might have been a little bit too much. So if we make a point here and kind of try and balance out the blues to something we like, I think this looks better, but I still want them to be just a tad more blue and then a little bit more desaturated. I don't want them to look artificial or too strong. So this is how I'm going about that. And I think from here, it looks pretty good. And then if we move forward up here, this also looks pretty good. So now we can go back to the primaries and we can try and play around with balancing them a little bit more. So I want to push a little bit more yellow orange into the gain here and maybe push a little bit more color into the lift just to balance out what we just did a little bit here. Something like this, and that might have been too much. So now I'm going to desaturate the blues a bit again, something like this. I think overall, to begin with, that looks pretty good. So this was our primaries and our curves. On this part of the scene, it went from this to this, which I think looks a lot better. And then on this part of the scene here, choose both these again, it went from this to this. So again, a huge difference in the colors. You might notice that I don't have any shadows for my masking here, and that's on purpose. I don't really have anything I want to do with the shadows in this one. Normally we just have it down here, but I'm not going to do anything in this case, so I've just deleted it to keep the node tree simple. But what we have here is that we have two parallel nodes, the inside and the highlights here, and the inside node here is combined with the outside as an outside node, so it's doing the opposite or selecting the opposite of the inside node. So what I want to do for the inside node here is that I want to make a mask, and we're going to go to the last frame, circular mask. I'm just going to take the horizon here, feather it out a little bit, and then I'm going to add a bit more contrast. So I'm going to head into the waveform here so I can see what I'm doing. Kind of lower this a little bit with shadows and increase the highlights. Just get a little bit more contrast in here. I think that looks pretty good. And then for this outside node here, I'm just going to lower my shadows a little bit to get more of a dramatic look and just get more shadows around the middle. So with these two, it looks like this, but now we get an issue. So if I move down, this is gonna look a little bit funny. If we then move up, I think it's going to look a bit funny from this perspective. So what I want to do is I want to take my inside node here, head to the tracking, but I'm going to track it manually and I'm going to use the auto tracking here. So I'm heading into from clip to frame. And I'm going to make a keyframe here on the last frame of the clip. Then I'm going to move backwards and I'm just going to make sure that this stays around the horizon all the way through. So we go down, down further, going to keep it on the horizon. Try and keep it on the horizon here, and now it's too far down, so I'm just going to move it up where I think the horizon is going to be, somewhere up here. And then if we play it through, hopefully it's going to stick somewhat to the horizon. This is good enough. It's not going to be noticeable, and it's just going to blend it through everything here as we play through it. That means that the outside node is going to take more effect down here on the lower part, and then less effect as we move up here. Still quite a lot because we have lowered the shadows quite a bit, but I think that's okay. So the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to head into the highlights here. I'm going to use the qualifier, God forbid it, and I am just going to increase the luminance here. I turned off the hue and saturation. I don't want them for anything here. I'm just going to turn on the luminance here until I've selected mostly just the highlights. Then I'm going to add 10 in softening in my low soft here. I'm just going to blur it out a little bit and add a little bit of denoise just to make sure that if my selection is a bit weird, then it's fine. But since we're just using the luminance range, it should be fine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my offset here, switching to the vector scope first. Then I'm going to take my offset and I'm going to move a little bit up here towards the red. And then I'm going to take the gain and move that a little bit left towards the yellow. Something like this. That just emphasizes this and it allows me to split these two a little bit, maybe even use the gamma to go a little bit more towards the left here. And I can just by looking both at the vector scope and at the clip here, I should be able to just ever so slowly move things around where I want them. And by using these three, I can kind of mix between the colors, so I can spread it out a little bit more. So we get more of a nuance in the sky here by mixing the gamma, the gain, and the offset, but only in the selected areas, so only in the brightest areas here. And that just gives us a bit more strength, a bit more nuance, a bit more interest in the sky here, which is going to be the main subject. Now, if we move back, we should be able to see that it still has affected some of the brightest areas here, which is fine. But what I want to see is if we can just take away the very brightest areas, and we cannot in a good way, so I'm not going to do that. And that is just going to affect how the water looks as well. I don't know if I like that fully, so what we could do here is we could add a mask here that just takes, let's make a squared mask and pull this up here, and it's fine that it's feathered out a little bit, something like this. And then we're going to track that as well, so head to frame, tracking, we're at the last frame, just going to move this up. And then I'm going to move it all the way up here. So it's mainly just affecting a little bit of the top. And that should just give us so that the bottom is not affected as much. Down here, we still have white in the water here, which could look a bit unnatural, but I think it looked more unnatural before. And now as we move up, because the mask coming up as well, really getting this vibe, this feeling of the sunset coming through here. One last thing I need to check is that we're not clipping too much in the highlights here. So if I'm just using the qualifier here, we can see that we're not clipping, but we are quite close. So one thing that we could do is just go back to our exposure here and just turn down the highlights a little bit here, around 10. It just gives us a little bit more texture, a little bit more information in the sky, because we did retain that, so it would be a shame to lose out on it. And then with our masking, what we've done is we went from this to this, which I just think looks a lot better than what we had before. So as a last step, if you turn everything off here and then go, let's just do it as one of the last frames here. We converted it to Rec 709, it looked weird. Then we did our color correction, made it look a bit better, but still this green weird color. Then we did our look, which just changed everything up a lot, gave it this teal and orange look. And then at the end, we added some masking, more light and more interest in the sky, darker shadows around here and more contrast in the middle. And that is what we are left with. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. If you made it this far, comment George is a star in the comments below. I thought that could be funny. Let me know if you have any questions or anything about the drone, the filters, anything you want to see me do or fly or try out. As you saw, I tried a little bit more of an advanced shot, if you will, in this video, and I'm gonna do a lot more as we move forward and as we go to different locations. Now I just wanted to get this series started with the first 2 episodes, and then I'm gonna take it a bit more slow and mix it up with all my other content as well. So let me know if you have any questions about the drone, about the filters, about flying, and I'm happy to make that part of the series as well. And I hope you enjoyed it. Give it a like and subscribe if you will as well. And other than that, I'll just catch you in the next video. Take care. Gonna have filters on. Wait.
This is Alex talking to the drone. He's so crazy.
Hey, his name is George.
His name is George.